Today on Confluents, we are honored to welcome a leading advocate for the protection and promotion of Indigenous rights in Canada, activist and award-winning artist and documentary filmmaker Ellen Gabriel, also known by her Kanien'kehá name, Katsi'tsakwas.
Born and raised in Kanehsatà, a Kanien'kéha or Mohawk community located north of Montreal and surrounded by the municipality of Oka, Katsi'tsakwas Ellen Gabriel emerged as a prominent spokesperson for her nation during the summer of 1990 in what became known globally as the Oka Crisis, a term she prefers to reframe as the Siege of Kanehsatà. The conflict was sparked by a planned golf course expansion in a pine forest and cemetery sacred to the Kanien'kehá people, igniting a 78-day standoff involving armed confrontation between the Kanien'kehá, the Quebec Provincial Police, and eventually the Canadian military.
From July 11 to September 26, 1990, despite her young age, Ellen Gabriel played a central role in this historic resistance, an event that left a profound and lasting impact not only on her personal life's path, but also on her community and on Indigenous-non-Indigenous relationships across Canada. The events also drew international attention to First Nations land rights and political demands. Since then, Katsi'tsakwas Ellen Gabriel has dedicated herself, both in Canada and internationally, to advancing the rights of Indigenous peoples and fighting for justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women. She has served as president of Quebec Native Women, Femmes Autochtones du Québec, from 2004 to 2010, and has spoken on the world stage, including before the United Nations.
Ellen Gabriel is also a talented visual artist and filmmaker. In 2024, she became the first Indigenous artist to receive the prestigious Grand Prix du Conseil des Arts de Montréal, the Montreal Arts Council, a recognition established 38 years ago. Katsi'tsakwas Ellen Gabriel recently released When the Pine Needles Fall, Indigenous Acts of Resistance, a series of conversations with historian Sean Carlton. In this book, she reflects on her role and experience during the Oka Crisis, the siege of Kanehsatà, and her lifelong commitment as an activist, feminist, and land defender. Also available in French from Éditions du Remue-Ménage, the book offers a long overdue Indigenous and feminist perspective on events too often recounted by others.
In today's interview, Katsi'tsakwas Ellen Gabriel revisits her journey, the battles she has fought and those still to come, and shares her hopes for the future. Ellen Gabriel, Sego.
Sego.
Good day. Thank you for agreeing to meet us today. We would like to hear you on what has become known as the Oka Crisis, that you'd rather refer to as the Kanehsatà siege. But we would also like to get to know you better. So, Ellen, you were born and raised in Kanehsatà.
Mm-hmm.
How was your childhood?
It was wonderful. You know, I grew up with horses. My father had horses. We grew up on a ranch. He rented saddle horses in the pines where everything happened. Mm-hmm. And, my mother would always send us out the door, go outside and play until, it's time to come in for lunch or for supper. But it was very, there was a lot of love, I guess. I'm very close with on my mother's side. My mother had just sisters. So I got to grow up with my cousins, and I knew my mother's mother, my grandmother, until I was about 15. At home, we felt, free. We'd be running in the fields, exploring what's this plant, like sliding in the winter, just always being outside, and we had the horses as well. But at school, it was a totally different story. At school, it was very much. We were not, I guess in a sense, we were viewed as different. We were treated a little bit differently. There was some teachers who were racist, which is very intimidating when you're a child, But so I never really liked school. I had to do well in school because my mother and father believed, you need an education, you're a woman, you're going to be, so go into something. I didn't want to be a secretary. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but that was not my idea. So I went to nursing for a little while at Dawson. But my father passed away when I was 21. My mother died 5 years later, so we were a very young family. So we're very close, and my aunties filled in the place, for my mother. It's a community that I think it used to be a community, because we used to have a lot of things that were community oriented, like activities. Mm-hmm. Even if it's like a rummage sale, my father would go to the town of Montreal, bring some clothes and toys back, and the women, the ladies' aid, they would organize the tables, and kids would be running around, and there'd be all the mothers and aunties sitting around and doing their business, but also watching us. So. Mm. And if someone told you stop that and behave, and you didn't listen, they would tell your mother. So it's like this whole expression of it takes a community to raise a child. That was very much what I grew up in. We never spoke back to our parents. We never spoke back to any elders, and we knew that when we talk about the impressions of why you become what you become. When we're kids, at least in my generation, and I'm sure today, we're told this is our land. Mm-hmm. This is Indian land. Back then, we called ourselves Indians, and so we were very protective of each other at one point. Today, it's not necessarily like that. I think we've assimilated capitalism into the culture, so it's not the same kind of community. But I have good memories of my childhood, and I think it was a very precious way to grow up, outdoors with animals, and had lots of fun.
And both your parents spoke Kanien'kehá to you, so that's really the language you grew up in.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I heard it all the time. Actually, I heard the three languages. I heard Kanien'kehá at home, and because my aunties and uncles were speaking it with my parents and my grandmother as well. English at school, and because my father had a business, he had a lot of French clients who would come riding. So we learned certain phrases in French. But it was all centered around horses and riding, horseback riding and horses. So I know all those expressions. But we heard, we caught the ear for how to pronounce French, and so I think in that respect, it was very much a privilege to have those three languages when we were growing up.
And your family was Christian.
My family was Christian, although, I think for a lot of Indigenous communities, especially from my parents' generation, they also still knew the old ways, right? They had to go to church. They were forced to go to church. Like my grandmother's generation, if they didn't go to church, the Algonquins would tell the Sulpicians. And there were Christian Mohawks and Nipissings that came with the Sulpicians in 1721. And so what happened was the Christianity never really took off in Kanehsatà. Like the Sulpicians, that was their mission, to Christianize us. And because they did not succeed, they were going to lose their grant. So when the rebellion, les patriotes, all that thing was going on, the Sulpicians had asked for the British, let us keep our land here, and we'll tell you where les patriotes are. And so in Saint-Eustache, there is a church near the river that has a cannonball indentation. I think you've seen it. And that's because les patriotes were held up in there. And so the British shot their cannons that way. But that's a Sulpicien. So there's always been a friction between Christianity and longhouse, traditional longhouse. Because a lot of people still kept the medicines. They still kept that part of their identity. And so it became normalized that, okay, you have to go to church. Otherwise, either the Indian agent will know, and then there's going to be trouble. So it was forced upon us to the point where it became normal. It wasn't even, there was no questions asked at a certain point. And so this is sort of the I guess the spirituality at that time. But as I got older, I found I guess it was always in me, to love the land, to love the trees, love all those things, because that's what we were taught. We grew up in that. And so when I became older, that's when I started learning about the longhouse. And
what is the longhouse?
The longhouse is a way of life. It's not. Some people call it a religion, but it's not a religion. It's actually it's called Kanien'kehá. It's the Great Law of Peace, which is our constitution, and it existed pre-contact, and it has survived colonization. So it's called the Great Law of Peace because you are supposed to have a good mind for your daily life. You have to be respectful of nature. And I think that's when I think about, even though people were Christian, they still had a respect for the land. They still understood how important the land is, and how much we're connected from the clan system to the governing system. So a lot of people, yes, they were Christian, some not practicing, right? But after when the crisis happened, the siege happened, I think a lot of people started learning. It became an education for our communities in Kahnawake and Kanehsatà. And so people started saying, well, I want to learn more about the Longhouse. Because it was always viewed as something demonic or heathenistic, right? And, the church, just like if we go back, I'm going to use part of my art history here. When you go back in time and you have an illiterate population, artists are used, so you see these hell and damnation. And so that's the kind of things that the missionaries used to try and convert the people, because they knew we were very spiritual anyways. Mm-hmm. So the idea of religion in our communities it's got an interesting history. And I think a lot of people are now turning towards more of a traditional way of life and the ceremonies following the 13 moons and, those kinds of things where you're more in touch with that part of creation where you are part of it. You're not separate. We're not above it. We're not below it. We're just part of it, and we're here just for a little while. So we have to keep we have to make sure that we're going to leave something for the generations that are coming after us.
You were talking about the nature and being outdoors, and among the places that were really important to you were the pines, where everything happened afterwards.
Yeah.
You write in your book, When the Pine Needles Fall, that it was a refuge for you. Not only for you, for your community. Mm-hmm. Is that how you remember it?
Yeah, I mean, we did, when we were growing up, we did a lot of horseback riding in the trails. A lot of the trails that were used during the crisis were actually the trails the horses had made. So I was very familiar with that. And it's really a place of peace when you think about it, because it's all trees, right? And they have their own energy. They're alive. For us, everything is alive, right? The pines, I know some people say, well, it's not sacred, they're just a forest. But for me, I think, and we're allowed to say this, it's sacred to us. Because when the Sulpicians were trying to displace people, they were kicking people out of their homes, taking land and selling it to Quebecois farmers. And there was an incident where there was a church, the Sulpician church had burnt down. I'm laughing because it just I can't stand the Sulpicians and the history that they did to us. So I'm thinking, so they arrested 6 Mohawks. They tried them 3 times. They were found not guilty every single time. The Sulpicians kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And there was Methodists that came in. And so they started, it was the United Church. And because they were looking for the men, they were always focusing on the men, there was arrest warrants. The men left the communities, so their wives were home with their children. Well, what the Sulpicians did, because they were rich, they're rich blue bloods from France, they were able to hire their own security force, like a police. The people used to call them bullies. because they would whack people and, pretty much what you see today. But they would enter the homes in the middle of the night and rough up the women. So the women decided they're going to go into the pines at night so they can sleep with their children. So in that way, it means a lot, because the pines has given the people so much. It's a place of refuge, a place to go to be peaceful. People just ride 4-wheelers in it now. They don't really realize the value of this forest and how much effort has been put into that forest. So, there are many ways to say it's sacred, but there's also there has to be an understanding of the history of why we say that, and for some of those reasons, I think that it's sacred. I think it's a very unique place. It has its own microclimate. Like even in the summer, if you go into the pines, that's aside from the mosquitoes getting at you, but it's cool. It's very cool. You wouldn't, like if it was really, really hot elsewhere, it's kind of a little bit cooler in the pines. So I think it's its own little world. And during, when we put the barricade up in March 1990, the people who lived near the treatment center, some had cut trees, and so their soil was starting to go down. So they didn't understand the importance of those trees. Those trees were there so that there would not be soil erosion. In the 1600s, the British, when they were coming up the river, like the Montagne and the Ottawa River, they could see Kanehsatà from far, and it would shine because it was just sand. It was mostly sand, and they would call it a castle. But it's the biodiversity has changed a lot since then, and it's really being threatened right now by the shop owners in the pines who are cutting trees.
So there was the Kanien'kehá siege on July 11, 1990, but the situation has roots further back in the past. What are they?
Ever since the Sulpicians came to Kanehsatà in the dead of winter with the Christian Mohawks and Nipissings and Algonquins, there was never any peace for the people there, because there were already Mohawks living there. And so it comes from a long line of racist doctrines to are justified to displace our people from their homes, to steal our land. And, 1990 was not the first time Kanehsatà was occupied. In the early 1900s, the same thing happened. It was an occupation because of so many things that were going on. So there's always been a lot of friction. And we see like a band council system that is more for the benefit of Canada and its provinces than our own people. And they're, they have no power. Even if the people wanted something, they didn't have really the power. So it evolved into that point where it became a critical point in our existence, in our history, that, these private developers were going to come in. They were going to dig up the cemetery to extend their parking lot. There was going to be condominium developments where our children are playing. And it was the last piece of common land for us. The golf course was already there. And even that was done under very insidious circumstances. So the people decided it's not going to happen. We're not letting you take this. We're going to stand here and we're going to be peaceful. It's a secondary dirt road. We didn't block a highway, right? Nobody really used it until they couldn't. And then all of a sudden they wanted to use it, right? The municipality of Oka said, the ambulance can't pass through. The ambulance has never passed through there. So it started off slowly, and it actually became like miniature workshops for people in the community and our neighbors in the village of Oka to learn about what was going on. And we had people in Oka who started an environmental group to study the trees, to study the biodiversity in there. And we had thought that maybe we could negotiate something, but the negotiations with the federal representative were really not negotiations. They came in with an intention, and they're not. There's a line they're drawing. You're not going to pass this line, and we didn't trust them, so the barricades stayed up. And I think John Chacha, the late John Chacha, was the only person that really understood the nuances, the subtle nuances of racism and discrimination that has impacted the community. And he was saying, like, there is a reasonable way to get out of this. We don't need to have any potential violence. And but of course, the government of Quebec at the time, I think they might have had, I suspect that they might have had a hand in the development themselves. There was a lot of judges, lawyers developing, that wanted that piece of land. And, we had people from other communities come as well. And, when they started calling us warriors, I thought, what do they mean? We're just community members. We're just, there's a flag up that, and we have to, if I can back up a bit, at the time, Akwesasne had just come out of a civil war. A couple of lives had been lost. People's homes were burnt because of the casinos and all that. So we were kind of like on edge ourselves from the community, so we didn't want anybody to come in as warriors. We want everybody to come in as Kanien'kehá. It's a nation issue. But, some people didn't accept the decision of the people. And so when we heard them calling us warriors, we thought, okay. But eventually, I think it dawned on people that by saying that it's just warriors at the barricades, that would justify the violence that they directed towards us. Yeah. So it was a long and complicated summer, and we are very surprised we survived. I think we were denied food. I think I lost around 18 pounds that summer, and some of the men wouldn't eat because they said, we want the kids to eat. We want So it was the community came together, but throughout the summer, the federal negotiator, Bernard Roy, and the provincial negotiator, Alex Patterson, they didn't come in with good faith. The focus was the Mercier Bridge.
Which had been blocked by Kahnawake?
Yeah, Kahnawake had blocked the bridge to support us. So there wouldn't be a second attack, so the army would not come in because they wanted to come in right away. They were on standby in St. Benoit, the army. So they had it planned. Many of us believe that they didn't come to dismantle the barricades, that they came in to kill us and to justify it by saying, oh, we're all warriors. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to anybody who calls themselves a warrior, because there were people from the Warrior Society who really helped us. And we had really good experiences with the people from Kahnawake and some of the guys from Akwesasne, but it was quite a stressful time because the community was open. There's a river. There's ways to come in. So we had people not from the community come in and vandalize some of the homes that were abandoned by Quebecois people. So it was quite a tumultuous summer.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to bring you back to that moment, but what happened on July 11, 1990?
Well, it was a morning that we didn't really. We had no idea, but we found out later that there were individuals from the community that knew the police were coming in. And we, like a lot of people said, okay, we're going to get arrested. We're going to make sure there's some people who stay behind so we can get the lawyers and bail people. So we just figured, okay, they're coming to arrest us. They're going to take the barricade down. And we said, fine, take it down, but it's going to go back up. But so when it was a paramilitary force that arrived. And the Sûreté du Québec is the first paramilitary force to be trained in North America. They were trained by the Israelis. So they came in, not for peace. Like the officer who I spoke with said, the time for politics is over. We're here to do a job.
And you write in your book that they were uncontrollable, even by government.
Yeah. Because we would have an agreement with Mr. Chacha, and he would speak to I think Robert Levine was the head of the SQ at that time. And, he would agree, right? But the officers at the checkpoints would say, like, we don't have to do what government says. They were a law unto themselves. And they committed a lot of human rights abuses that summer, but we were not allowed to lodge complaints. We did not have access to human rights complaints at that time. So the SQ had a lot of power at that time. And that's why we thought, like, if the army comes in, the army's going to be better. But they weren't. But to go back to the morning of July 11th, so they arrived in 5:15. We had meetings that said, okay, the women will go to the front because the women have title to land. So we went, and it was scary because these guys, some had paint on their faces, and they were aiming their weapons at us, right? So, and some were shaking, so it's kind of like, I'm not too comfortable with this guy. He seems more scared than I am, But we went up 3 times. We had tried to negotiate with them in the span of maybe an hour, maybe longer, and they had given us a time frame to leave. And I said, well, take the barricade down, but we're not leaving. This is our land. We're staying. No, you have to get out. You have to get out. Everyone has to get out. So we negotiated like at least 45 minutes, and by then the community was arriving. People were waking up. I didn't know that people were on the other side of the 344. They had burnt tires. And I think the police were more scared than we were, to be honest with you. And I remember there was an ally who had told us towards the end, the SQ had said, these are not normal people. When we shoot tear gas at people, they run away. When we shoot concussion grenades at people, they run away. But these people kept coming back. But it goes to, I guess, the courage that is innate in us because we have heard so many stories of the struggle. And so, after 3 hours of trying to see if we could reason with the police, I don't think anybody expected them to leave. Something happened. I'm not sure what happened because I was standing on the road out in the open near the lacrosse box with other people. And all of a sudden we heard a bang and we weren't sure if that was a gunshot. And all of a sudden it just went, just like what you heard. And so we all went running for cover. But just to see the people, how the people reacted to something that, people would come by sometimes and they would drop off sandwiches or drop off coffee or just talk, But and there was just a handful of us that were manning the barricades. So when this happened, the whole community came out. And the whole community got together. I think it was the first time in a long time that the whole community stood together. Because we understand what racism is. We understand that. And I think that really helped us. The fact that so many people were there to support. But it only lasted for maybe 2 weeks. And then it was like, when's this going to be over? I had an uncle who worked in Hudson, and he was like, okay, when is it going to be over? I want to go back to work. It's like, and many people were not having good experiences. Like they would have to go at least 5 kilometers that could, go all the way around to go to the village to get groceries. And they weren't allowed to bring groceries back in. Yeah. it really made you see the kind of suffering that perhaps our ancestors from previous generations must have felt, because they didn't have the media to be a witness to what was going on. And if this is what happens when the media is a witness, then that's pretty scary, because that means they think they can do whatever they like and, create sort of a propaganda of lies to say, these are dangerous people. They're a threat to the public security, so that we need to get rid of them. And it was really the other way around. These are the people who are a threat to us. So it's not to say we didn't try a peaceful route. Just the government does not want that.
Ellen Gabriel, you had a very special role in this crisis. You were the spokesperson for the Longhouse and then for the community. How did you live that role?
Well, for us under the Great Law of Peace, men and women are equal. The patriarchy likes to put chiefs up here, but it's actually, the clan mothers who choose the chiefs. So it was decided that men and women would speak. So we did have, like, from March 9th to up to July 11th, we had different speakers come up, and that happened to be my day. It just happened to fall on the day that I was supposed to speak to the media. So I said, okay, I'll do whatever I can. And then they liked what they were. I guess they liked my role, and so they kept me on for the whole summer. But part of it was because I was one of the few, which doesn't really say a lot, one of the few who could speak French. Not well, mind you, but I was one of the few who could do that.
You were in your 30s.
I was 31.
31, quite young to have that kind of role in that situation.
Yeah, but I wasn't alone. I had a lot of people around me to help and to encourage me, because when you come from a small town, there's a lot of issues people have. So some people had an issue with the fact that I'm a woman speaking, and said, shouldn't it be a man? See, this is how assimilation has affected our culture. But the people in the Longhouse were actually quite different. They just said, like, it's the women's role to protect the land. So I was one of them, and there was Mavis Etienne and Joe Diome, occasionally Lauren Thompson. The optics of men and women are speaking here, and because our nation has equality for our traditional governance, and we're upholding our roles. We have obligations when we accept the Great Law of Peace. There's a ceremony, and you have to hold a wampum, and you have to pledge that you will always uphold, the great peace. So that's what we did.
And the women had a very important role at the barricades too. You write in your book that when the police came, they wanted to talk to the men, and you said no.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the SQ ever met Mohawk women that they had no clue about us, and it was like, you're going to talk to us. You're not the one who's going to decide who's going to talk, right? So we had elders that were there as well, and some young women. So we had like a whole range of women that were standing there, blocking the police from coming in. So to me, that's why I did the documentary about July 11th. It's the role of the women. The men sought guidance from the women. They would say, "Oh, the SQ are shooting at night. What do we do?" Like, "Well, don't shoot back, because that's what they want." You have this whole community that you are protecting, and you have to remember that that's who is going to be impacted if you do something. It's going to be the whole community. So there was that, and the women were cooking because the men were out on the front lines. So there would be, the young women would take the food to the men on the lines, and it was a very well organized, considering it was like, but this is what happens when you know your culture and your traditions. These are my roles. This is what I'm supposed to do. And I think that kicked in, and eventually people, even in the community, saw that, okay, this is interesting, because, it's the erasure of our identity has been, or the attempts to erase us has been so strong, whether it's through religion, whether through its laws and policies, that people become fearful when you step outside that box. Right? And but if they see other people doing that, they're stepping outside the box and saying, no, this is who we are, these are our rights, then people start, it's like a role model, like you're modeling the behavior that will help you survive.
Your mother would say that to you when you were going to school and you had a racist, somebody calling you really...
She called me a dirty squaw.
Yeah.
A stupid squaw, actually.
And your mother told you, don't act like they think you will, like acting as a savage, sorry for the word. So there was a lesson that you would remember maybe in 1990?
Well, both my parents and I would say my extended family, they made us feel proud, never be ashamed, no matter how much, because they themselves went through it as children. My mother lived in the village, what's called the village of Oka, but it's Kanehsatà. And some of the Quebecois girls would yell names at them. So there was not a good relationship because of that. So she understood that when we went to school, and it was maybe the first incident that she was aware of, because there were others that I didn't tell her, but this one I got suspended from school. I got expelled. And I thought, I'm going to get it when I get home. And it was just a nice quiet conversation that we had, because she understood what that feels like. So when you have a parent who understands that helps you. Right, that helps you kind of say, okay, well, maybe I overreacted, but in a sense that if you let them get away with it, like if I did nothing and I just let it, just put my head down and like she's calling me a stupid squad, and she would continue that, right? So in my mind, my young 13-year-old mind, I said, well, no, you're not going to get away with this. So I fought with her, but it was the last time that I did that.
In 1990, the image that you were projecting in the media was that of a young woman, very strong and very quiet, even maybe shy, but being even stronger because of that. That's not how you remember it?
No, I was... I am in many ways. I'm very much an introvert. I'm very shy. I didn't like speaking. I'd get palpitations if I had to do a class presentation. But that when you get placed into a situation where it's life or death, and people are depending on you, you kind of forget all that. You have like a mental shield around you. And all I did was focus on, okay, these are the issues today. This is what we discussed today. So I'm just going to focus on that. And I wasn't aware of the image I was projecting. I was just surviving like everybody else, So I was really surprised when feminists thought, oh, look, there's an Indigenous woman speaking. We usually see only men. And it's like, so for me, it just sort of was not an issue. But I can see why it is, But at the same time, I think because I had a lot of support from elders and from people in the community, that it helped motivate me to do a better job every single time. And I had my family too to think about. I didn't want the SQ to know who my family was. I tried to keep it very private, because they were already harassing one of my sisters who lived in the village, and my aunties lived in the village, and they didn't have the barricades, they were more vulnerable than we were in a sense. So that's part of the reason why I just kind of like And I didn't even go into the cemetery to visit my parents' graves because I didn't want, photographers to take pictures. I thought this is a very personal thing, right? Mm. And the issue is not about me. The issue is the land. The issue is land dispossession, the brutality of a colonizer. So I just focused on that issue, and I just kept that in my mind all the time.
And yet in the media, even if you were a very prominent person, there was a lot of picture, among them that famous photo of the soldier and a Mohawk with a mask. The optics were that the warriors, so-called warriors in the medias, were like really violent people and were holding the community, including against its will. So what were the damages done to your cause or to your struggle at the time because of the narrative?
Well, I think we had people in the community who helped push that narrative. Because you had the band council who did not support the barricades. Mm-hmm. They were actually working with government against us. So you had a group of people who were fighting to be the next band councillor. Right? So you had a committee for change and you had the actual band council. And the committee for change, which is really interesting, received $100,000 from the federal government to be an opposition group to the band council. It's never been done anywhere in Canada. This is during the crisis, right? This is during. So these people, I remember in August they had a press conference and they were always complaining, we want to be at the negotiation. And they wanted to be where we were sitting. And we said, the community decided these 4 people will be the ones sitting at the table. And they report to the community. But they were insisting. So when they didn't get their way, what they did was saying, well, the community is being held hostage by the warriors. We don't agree with them. We want the army to go in and clean up. So, the images of the masked men with guns, people didn't really understand that. Because Bradley Larocque is the person. He's from Saskatchewan, actually. Mm-hmm. He's the person that is depicted in that famous photo. He's one of the gentlest, kindest people I know. But it's kind of like, well, what would you do if that was your family or your people? You would, in a sense, sacrifice yourself, for the greater good. And that's exactly what he did and other men did during that summer. What happened was the media really took that narrative of, these are people who are being, a community is being held hostage by a small group of people. But it wasn't. The community was being held hostage by the Sûreté du Québec and the army. We couldn't bring in medicine, food, or any people without their permission. We had to, people had to pass 5 checkpoints just to get back home or to go out. And even then, each time would take a little while. So for me, this is why it's important to write about it. And my documentary that I did is to talk about reclaiming the narrative of this summer. Because today, even today, mainstream media only mentions or only talks about it as if it's finished, it's over, it's done with. This is something from the past, when actually it has its own impacts. It's had its own legacy, as we see in my community today. And the government did its best, but I think, the late Brian Mulroney had seen a friend of mine, and he had said, we lost the PR war. Mm-hmm. Which to me, I think means that the media didn't quite succeed. I remember a lot of union leaders like Michel Chartrand, you had Madeleine Perrin, Rémi Savard, they were at these protests for us, telling the people, before we talk about our sovereignty, we have to respect and acknowledge the sovereignty of Indigenous people. So for me, that meant that people were having a critical eye and how they viewed what was going on. And the media really had no clue, the historical clue. We had people coming from, I don't know, it was Belgium or the Netherlands or something. They knew more about our history than the journalists who are right here. Mm. So it was really something that I think helped change, in a sense, how people viewed us. That we're not extinct. We're actually still very much alive. Our culture and our language is still there. And I think when we look at the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we talk about the media's role in telling the truth. And from what I see, even today, they're not. They're just parroting whatever the government wants them, the elite tell them. But, I hopefully one day history will show that this awful thing that took away the life of Marcel Lemay was actually the cause of people, elites in Quebec, who had the power to call in a police force. I remember the secretary of Sam Elkis getting blamed for the raid. It's like a secretary does not command the Sûreté du Québec. So there was a lot of blame going, a lot of people saying, no, I didn't do that. I didn't, So to me, that the government lies a lot. And I think that if we look at all the commissions and reports that have come out since that time, and the Royal Commission was one of our suggestions, that we're starting to see things that were silent or not talked about being talked about now. And it's a shame that it's not being taught in school. The curriculum that I went to school with, I graduated high school in 1976. It's the same curriculum. I mean, there's a little blurb, Indian residential school affected Indigenous languages. Yeah. And, so we still have an uphill struggle to get to reclaim that narrative, I think.
Ellen Gabriel, do you feel that the Oka Crisis or the siege of Kanehsatà has robbed you of something? I mean, by that, time for art or time with your family, community? Because that activism is time-consuming, I guess, nerve-wracking.
It is. I never thought of it as robbing me of anything, or I was away from my family for long periods of time. And, there's an expression in our culture that, it's in our constitution actually, that the chiefs and clan mothers have to have skin 7 spans thick. Right? And I kept hearing that from elders saying, you got to have 7 spans thick. That people will attack you. They will say stuff about you that's not true. But, just focus on what is the most important thing, right? So like I said, the issue is not about me, but I am contributing to something where the great law of peace is what I follow, is what I do. It's what motivates me to continue to be an activist. And for me, I believe that my activism should not just be focused on my nation, but all the other nations who need that help, and we're supposed to be promoting peace. So the whole history of us as a violent people, I think it's wrong. Because when the French slaughtered a whole bunch of our people, and they were walking, there's women and children, the Confederacy, the Iroquois Confederacy issued a warning. They didn't go and attack. And we issue 3 warnings to a nation that's trying to cause us harm. And then there's war. And the women declare war. But our first attempts will be peace, right? And so for me, this is what I feel that my activism is doing. You're trying to educate people so that there can be peace. And it might not be in my lifetime, But hopefully someday somebody will say, oh, remember what that lady said there? I forget her name, but I have these are not new stuff. I mean, this is I've known elders who did it all their lives, just trying to teach, young people how to stay strong. How to keep it going. That it's not, for me, it's not something to put on my resume. This is stuff that will benefit a lot of people, and it'll benefit me as well if we start telling the truth. What's really going on? We're not all the same. There are people who all they want is the band card. They have no use for the culture, the language, the land, anything. But to me, I think my mission in life, my mandate that I was given was to be able to speak. And I'm very privileged to have this opportunity to be able to do that, because it is tough. It is hard. It's not a vacation, when you go and do these things. It's really, but you have to also educate yourself, know what the issues are. Can't just, like sometimes I tell youth, I said, you say this is your land, so how is it your land? Why is it your land? What makes you say that? So it's really about, going deeper than the rhetoric that we hear often.
And after the Oka Crisis, you traveled the whole world to talk about the event.
A bit.
Well, you went to Japan.
I went to Japan. I was
in
specifically
Europe
invited to go to Japan.
Yeah. So how did your audience respond when you went to Japan and Europe?
In Japan, it was great. They said, well, that's not the Canada we know. It's really interesting to hear this, because Canada has this ultra boy image that they're so good to everybody. It was interesting because I traveled on the Iroquois Confederacy passport, and I had a lot of trouble. I was taken aside in Japan in a very small room. My suitcase, everything was checked, and because I had brought some tobacco. And they said, what's this? So, is it marijuana? I said, it's not marijuana. Anyway, so one of the guards came in and he said, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from Canada. And he says, what nation? No, he said, what nation are you? And I said, I'm Mohawk. And then he said, where are you from? So he looked at some of the photographs I was bringing with the soldiers and stuff. And he said, Mohawk, Canada. I said, okay, it's okay, close. And then they let me go, which was really fortunate. But the Japanese audience was quite interesting because they're very honorable people. They're very forthright. They're very kind people, So they were, I think, in some respects, and I'm putting words in their mouth, but in some respects, it felt like they were ashamed of Canada, for doing this. And we traveled to the northern island, Hokkaido, as well. We traveled with David Suzuki. We were following him, but it was an interesting and very wonderful experience to meet the Indigenous people, the Ainu, in the northern island, and see the differences and the similarities between our people. But yeah, I think what is happening, and it's been happening for decades, is people are starting to see that Canada might seem like a nice country, but for Indigenous people, it's a very different reality that we face.
Is Canada ashamed of the Kanehsatà siege now? But I guess my question is, what have we learned from Oka, from Kanehsatà?
I think if we're talking about the government, what they've learned is they've learned how to repackage colonization so it's not so blaringly oppressive. They have a rights recognition package. They did absorb the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples into domestic law and the federal laws. But there's no practice. There's no implementation. So to me, that's what I'm waiting for, is how they're going to implement this, because you also have the provinces, right? It's a federal law. It's not a provincial law. But I think that people learn that Indigenous peoples are still here. And there are some who are willing to go the distance of protecting their land. We see examples of the Wet'suwet'en, Ipperwash, Gustafson Lake, Grassy Narrows. These are issues that probably would have been hidden before. And they were hidden, right? Because a lot of communities have been struggling for a long time to try and get some sort of justice for being displaced from their land, losing their hunting grounds, and I think Canada is a little bit more cautious in how they speak, but not in their actions. I don't think
it hasn't changed that much.
No, it's just like you put a pretty bow on a.
It's cosmetic.
Yeah. So, but I still believe that the band council system is the problem. You can't have a nation to nation with a municipality, and that's what we're doing. We're in municipalities. So to me, I think we're in one of the final stages of colonization here.
And what about public opinion? Do you think that people today would have the same opinion about what would be going on? That is, could the same thing happen? Or do you think non-Indigenous people and also other nations and all kind of people would step up? Do you feel that you have more allies than you had at the time?
I'm not sure about that, because we did have a lot of allies. I was really surprised with the reaction of a lot of Quebecers. Quebec is known for its social mindedness more than any other province. But at the same time, we're also struggling between this issue of sovereignty, and to us, we're still butting heads because of that. I couldn't comfortably say whether or not we would have more. I think there is a generation now, today, of youth who are more radical, who are not accepting the lies, government is telling. So I think from them we would see a big reaction. Because they are the ones inheriting all this climate crisis. Their children, these are people I'm talking about, their late teens or early 20s, when they have children, their children are going to be really feeling the effects. And as we see the rise of fascism, I think there is an effort by many different people and different groups to remain in solidarity with each other, because I think we are slowly losing that right of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, democracy, But I think the difference is, if it was to happen today, there's a lot more people aware and informed. And this is why the problem that caused the crisis is still there. It didn't change. The racism, it's still there.
And the land, you say it's a land struggle, first of all?
Yeah. Because we are part of the land. We're not separate, from our clan system, the governance, our ceremonies, all our traditions. It's all based on the language of the land. And so there has to be a way for us to figure out how we can coexist without losing our identity and our right to self-determination. Making bylaws is not self-determination. If we could control education, rather than, what I see in school is they're teaching kids just to graduate, to pass the test so they can graduate. There's no critical thinking in that. So there are some changes, and then, like the expression goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Because the question of of the land in Kanehsatà is not resolved. I heard you talking about this land as a checkboard. Because a lot of Québécois don't know that, but Kanien'kehá is not a reserve.
It was granted reserve status. It's all Crown land, right? And the reason why it's a checkerboard is because of the Sulpicians and the British, colluding together to defraud us of our lands, forcibly, and even killing sometimes people from their homes. This is the reason why we identify with people like in Palestine. We understand there's a history. We may not be living it now, but for us, Mr. Gaulin, this so-called self-proclaimed philanthropist, sold land, even though he says, "Well, I'm in reconciliation mode, but I got to eat." I mean, this is a rich man, and just the games that people play to pretend, to try and trick us into believing, take these shiny beads, that should be enough for you. Right? To me, it equates to that sort of, well, these people are simple, so we can fool them whenever we can, at every chance we get. So the chipping away of our land is still going on. There has been no stoppage, and I think the Band Council is a lot to blame for it, because if they claim, like the federal government and the provincial government say that they recognize one authority in Kanien'kehá, and that's the Band Council. Even though there's all kinds of laws that say that traditional governments are legitimate, but they're still taking our land. But for me, the problem right now is our own people.
Oh, yeah.
They're cutting the pines for their businesses, and they did that without consultations of the people. They just took, pretty much like the colonizer. And we historically, since contact or since the reserve system was created, we have lived in poverty. And so for people to start making millions of dollars, that's new for our people. So assimilating capitalism is no biggie. It's was on its way anyways. So we say Ukwahunwe, which literally it means the real people, but it means Indigenous people. So when you have our own people doing what the colonizer's doing, it's very problematic. And even if the government considers it Crown land and says that they have the authority over the Crown land, they're shirking their responsibilities. If you consider how they apply the law to us, they pick and choose when or how or if they will apply a law. And for these people that are cutting the pines and have businesses there, I totally understand. It's not a reflection of them as cannabis sellers, and there's more than that there. They're creating jobs, okay, fine. But there was no consultations with the community, and you don't do that as a Ukwahunwe person. Take what is not yours. That goes against our culture. So for me, the biggest problem right now is our people. The biggest problem is how the government works with our people to displace us, to take our lands, and to make sure that, the next generation doesn't have the opportunity to enjoy those lands. So it's a very difficult situation that we have, but there is nobody in government that is willing to help us. So we have threats to our security, but it doesn't matter. There's nobody there to help us except us.
As a woman, as a Kanien'kehá, as an activist, as an artist, because you're a famous artist, Ellen, we didn't talk about it, but you are. Do you have reasons to be hopeful?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to remain hopeful no matter what the situation is. Otherwise, you'll just die. But I mean, hope is an essential part of survival. Because if you don't have hope, that means you've given up. And I haven't given up yet.
Where do you find it? Where do you find hope?
I don't really think about it. I just, I have a very simple life, and I have a good network of friends. I have a good network in my family. I know I'm very thrilled that I was able to change my career at this point in my life to become a documentarian, so that I can reclaim the narrative that's been ignored or intentionally erased. So the hope for me is when I look at the kids. I have my niece has two boys. I look at them and I see hope in them. I've seen hope with the students when I was at the encampments and speaking with the students, and I see hope with them. They're searching for a better life. They want to be free. And I think, to me, just the fact that there are good-minded people, even like yourselves, who are taking an interest in this story, to me, that gives me hope. Because it means that what we're doing does mean something, right? And I had a lot of elders who have since passed, and I had a lot of good teachers not to give up hope. And it helps being an artist, because being an artist, you can go off by yourself. I put on music and I draw or whatever. So you need to have self-care. You can't be doing this 24 hours a day. You won't survive. So,
and keeping your connection to your language and to your culture, is that a source of strength for you too?
Yeah, because it has with it sort of those memories of my childhood when I was always, that's all I heard, right? Even in the community, we had a restaurant, and elders would come in and they would be speaking. So I was still able to hear it, because I had left, I had gone to school, and I heard French and English. I really didn't hear my language. And then as I got older, I said, well, you know what? I spoke it as a child. I want to, relearn it. And so I did. Because it gives me those memories of my parents, my grandmother, and all those people who have now, a lot of, we're the elders now. My generation's the elders now.
And Ellen, you were recently awarded the 38th Montreal Art Council Grand Prix for When the Pine Needles Fall. Considering what happened 35 years ago in Montreal, do you think this award shows that the dialogue between Kanien'kehá community and the non-Indigenous population is easier or less difficult than it was 35 years ago?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I just went there this morning to receive a nice gift from an artist, Hannah Claus. And yeah, I mean, I did not expect to win the prize. I had nothing written. And so I was fumbling in my French to thank them for the award. I mean, yeah, I think there is an openness and a willingness now to listen to us, to hear us, and to see the stories that we're creating, whether they're historical or whether they're fiction or nonfiction. There's an interest, I think. It helps. Maybe time helps too, like to have a distance from the intensity of emotions that was going on for everybody, actually, that summer. So it's really a wonderful thing. I think that times are changing in that respect for at least the people, the public. It's changing. The attitude is changing. Mm-hmm. I just was thinking about that Grand Prix. I think it was, for me, it was like a shock. I guess I really didn't think I was going to win. But to see the warmth from the people there, it's very encouraging, I guess, to see that things are changing positively. Mm. I hope that people will live in freedom, and I hope that people will see the Indigenous peoples as their friend, not their foes.
And art is a good vehicle for that.
Art, I think, is one of the best vehicles. And I remember when the apology came, and I think it was in Ottawa, and there was an old lady there, and she was looking at one of the installations by Joan Cardinal Schubert, which is desks with an apple on the desks, and I think there was something written, and she says, artists are going to lead the way to our healing.
Ellen Gabriel, Niawa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A heartfelt thank you to Kanien'kehá activist and artist Katsi'tsakwas Ellen Gabriel for generously sharing her invaluable insider's perspective on the events that unfolded 35 years ago in Kanehsatà. These historic moments profoundly reshaped how Canadians understand Indigenous rights and the ongoing centuries-long resistance of First Nations across the country. And thank you, dear listeners, for joining us for this special edition of Confluents.
Confluents is a production of Mission Chez Nous, an organization dedicated to Christian solidarity with First Peoples. For more information, www.missioncheznous.com. See you soon, Catherine.
See you soon, Mathieu.
Cette émission est produite par l'organisme Mission Chez Nous avec le généreux soutien financier des œuvres Marianne Lavallée de la Fondation Lucien Labelle et du Fonds Roland Leclerc.